good morning, good afternoon, from wherever you might be joining us today. Thank you for attending another TPE Story Short. My name is Brenda Ice, and I serve in the capacity at TPE as this year's chair. I'm excited to finally see all of our work come together in just another 3 short weeks. My day job, I serve as the Assistant Dean and Director of Campus Life at Scripps College in Southern California. Thankfully, I appreciate everyone being here today. I have the honor of having an esteemed colleague and friend join us today to talk about his experiences at last year's TPE virtual event. This will be our second iteration of doing our kind of TPE interview hall in a virtual setting. And we thought it was important before we launch into this year's to kind of give you some insight into what last year's was from an employer's perspective. We will also be doing that from a candidate perspective next week. So if you have you yourself or candidate or have some grads going through the process, please encourage them to join that. I'm going to turn it over to Corey. He will do his own introduction of who he is and what he's about. But our time spent today is meant to be really informal. He's just simply going to provide experiences about what it was. We will field any questions that you might have. Feel free to include them in the chat. And then towards the end of our presentation, we'll go through a bit of moderation. You can ask questions directly of him. Without further ado, I welcome Dr. Corey Shapiro to the stage.
Why, thank you very much, Brenda and Kirsten. It's an honor to be here with you all, and it's great to see a couple of familiar faces here as well. So I'm Corey Shapiro. I have the pleasure of being the Associate Director of Residential Life at Arizona State University. And I've been focusing so much, like all of you, on COVID management that it's actually a breath of fresh air to talk about professional staff recruitment. I've had a long-standing history of working with TPE and recruitment processes. I went through the placement through ACPA and OPE well before TPE was a thing. And when TPE was created, in one of the first years when it was hosted in Phoenix, I had the pleasure of serving on the planning committee from 2012 to 2015. And then I started a role at ASU as an Assistant Director of Leadership and Development, where I oversaw the professional staff recruitment work group for another 4 years, from about 2017 to 2020. I also worked with Stars College. I don't know if any of you are alumni or have students who've gone through, but preparing some of our undergraduate students for what it would look like to go into our world of housing and student affairs and how to prepare for interviews, for placement exchanges, and so on and so forth. And of course, I also forgot to mention, I have a background in human resources before going into higher ed. So a very special place in my heart for these kind of experiences. So let me tell you a little bit about ASU. Well, actually about our experience. Every year we typically go in person to TPE. Some years we'll go to the Oshkosh Placement Exchange, OPE as well. But this past year in January 2020, I say that it's important to note that this is before everything with COVID really started impacting our processes. We have 41 professional staff members. These are full-time community directors, they're assistant community directors, management interns. 87% of our 41 professional staff members at ASU had planned to continue in their roles between, as of even April 2020. We only had a few people that said they were going to leave. So for the first time in years, we decided we were not going to go in person to TPE last year. And we knew we were going to save some money, put it towards this year when we assumed that we'd have more openings. And one of the great things about doing that was we had already come up with utilizing this video conferencing service called Zoom that nobody had really heard of. And we had planned our interviews. We had started our interviews. In fact, we had utilized TPE to schedule so many of these interviews, and we were almost done with our interviews before the decision was made to move TPE this past year to an online platform. So I want to share that with you because that really does frame what our process was last year. And I forgot that we have a sensor here to move or the light goes off. So yes, I know COVID-19 had impacted TPE on March 12th, and at that point, we had actually finished the majority of about 76 first-round interviews that we had hosted already at that point. COVID-19 then impacted us at ASU, like many other schools, like most schools, and put us in a holding pattern. So I had asked Brenda after I had been approached about speaking to you all, I'm like, are you sure you want me to speak about our experience? Because we ended up not hiring anyone because of COVID and the freeze that actually is still in place right now for this current academic year. We're hopefully in a very different place for next year, and we're going to know that in the next week, actually. But as far as this experience, we got to interact with a lot of candidates. We had a lot of interviews, but we ended up not being able to hire anyone due to COVID and freezes across the university for positions. So with that said, we learned a lot, and I'm excited to share some of those lessons learned with you all. So how did we utilize TPE? This past year, well, we marketed our anticipated positions through TPE, obviously. We also did that with OPE as well, but with a much smaller number because we do require a master's degree for positions at our institution. And there aren't that many candidates at OPE that apply to that. So we also sorted and identified candidates for the position, and we reached out to them very directly. And if it wasn't for TPE, we would have had some difficulty this year identifying who were the candidates that we wanted to spend some time with. And of course, when it came to the other employers, we also did our research. We kept up with other schools, who was hiring which positions, and we followed their marketing, maybe some of your schools, to figure out how social media was being utilized. And that's something we do each year as well. We learn from you all just the way that you all learn from us, so it goes both ways. So some of the successes of our process. We knew that some of our applicants we would find through TPE, probably the majority of them. Some of them might be from OP, but some of them might not be able to attend any placement experience. Therefore, they might just apply directly through ASU. And historically, we were doing phone interviews for them while in-person interviews at TPE and OPE. This year, we said we wanted to have the same experience for all three groups of candidates. So that was important to us to have the same kind of Zoom experience, no matter where someone was applying through. We also had a backup plan. We recognized that not everyone has the technology to have a video conference. Many people may utilize work, or we had someone even in a library at one point. But we did have to do some phone interviews that we made a point of treating as if we wanted to make sure that we gave them the same experiences. Here we go again. The same experiences, regardless of whether they were using Zoom technology or not. So that was a good backup plan that helped a number of our candidates. We also recognize that for someone to be considered at ASU, like some other schools, they have to apply through our HR website. And so we had to figure out a way to make sure that everyone was having a similar experience, regardless of whether they started by applying through us and then we reached out to them, or we reached out to them and told them, you're a TPE candidate, we'd love for you to apply, and then we can set up an interview. So this year, that worked very well. Some years it's been a headache for us. And our TPE, OPE processes and our ASU application process were very much combined for us, which was great. We also, I already mentioned, we came up with a virtual interview process more than a month before even TPE or many other schools had done the same. And we got lucky with that. This year, we're trying to be very intentional, and everything we're doing virtual as well, like many other schools out there. I'm also very proud that we came up with a very organized way of running a committee. We had taken a number of our professional staff members and at least one of our assistant directors who served as an advisor to this work group. That's the role I used to play. We also had a professional staff team lead, and then we divided our other community directors into 4 different task forces. One was all about assessing candidates and their experiences, asking about the host experiences, the interviewers, doing it at different times during the process. Assessment is so important. We also talked about the interview experience and had that be another one of our task forces. Marketing, social media, again, trying to know what's out there. The on-campus experience, making sure that we had a virtual on-campus experience and sending gifts, or at least a little package with some Devil spirit items, not to mention some resources to anyone that we did a virtual on-campus interview with. But I think the thing I'm most proud of this past year, and I think everything with TPE and everything with COVID really helped make this something that we could focus a lot of time and attention on, is communication. We wanted to over-communicate versus under-communicate. So many schools that I went through searches with way back when, and I hear this every year from our students who go through searches, as well as employers who say they want to change something at their school. There's just too many schools out there that someone applies for a job and then they never follow up with those candidates, or their follow-up is so impersonal. So I personally sent emails to our candidates on so many different occasions. First, one email just to express interest in the candidate and see if they're interested in interviewing with us. Another email for scheduling an interview after they express interest, also with options for dates and times. Another email just to confirm the date and time of that interview, along with the Zoom link, some technology tips, and what to expect at the interview. But then the most important thing was, since we had a hiring freeze, sending out update emails on a regular basis. Our first one was on March 18th, before even all of our interviews were complete. Second one was a month later, April 10th, and then May 14th. And it almost felt like a broken record because things kept getting worse, not better, due to COVID. And every time I would ask everyone, I tried to let them know that we want to interview them as much as we know they want to interview us, or for an on-campus interview. We actually held back from doing our on-campuses virtually even because we didn't know if it made sense, and it didn't, because we didn't hire anyone. But by the time that we made final decisions in the fall, I had sent 6 to 7 update emails to every one of our candidates who made it all the way to the end. And there were actually 32 candidates that received that last update in the fall, where I'm like, I hope you found a job. And if there's anything we can do to support you as an individual and as a candidate, please let us know. And obviously we'd love them to interview again next year, but we hope that they all found jobs. And many of them did. And it was exciting to build those relationships with them. And at this last year's AIMHO conference that was virtual, and last year's NACUR conference, we had a number of these individuals that saw people from ASU that maybe interviewed them, or myself. And it was good to make those connections. So the last part of that I'd like to spend with you all is just about challenges and the valuable lessons learned. COVID. Obviously, we learned that we needed to show compassion and empathy to what our candidates were going through, and which we already strive to do every year, but even more so this year. We needed to tie in the pandemic into the language of our messaging. We didn't want to just say there was a freeze for the fun of it. Like, there was a very real reason for that, and our candidates understood. We also needed flexibility for this process overall, and not just with us and the candidates, but between those at Arizona State University on our team as well. Technology. We learned the very first week, the first day that we were doing Zoom interviews, the valuable lesson that you've all learned, which is that you can only have one meeting under your name at any given time. Well, we originally had one person when the admin do an amazing job by scheduling all of these interviews over one day, and we realized we had to very quickly find some other links, and we had to email everyone to tell them that. So lots of lessons learned on our end. And again, we recognized that everyone had different experiences and resources when it came to technology. ASU specific, again, the need to just make it clear that everyone has to apply to our requisition on our HR website before we can consider them for an interview. And then also, unfortunately, we had to have a different requisition for each of our campuses. So we had 3 campuses that were searching out of our four candidates at one point. And some of our candidates applied for all 3. Some of them just chose 1 out of the 4, and we had some marketing to explain the difference between our campuses. And finally, we also recognized we weren't able to do everything we wanted. We didn't get to do reference checks, though we had a great online form ready to go. We didn't get to do the assessment before and after on-campus interviews because we didn't do virtual on-campus interviews. So there were a number of things that we were ready for, but we never really didn't get to see the light of day. So at the end of the day, we did a lot of our planning in fall, figured out who was planning on coming back or not in January 2020. But this whole process really took place from, ironically, February 3rd to April 3rd. And that's when our freeze really got going. And everything else I've already shared with you. So we're excited with our long-standing relationship with the TPE. We look forward to that continuing in the future, even virtually for certain years, like this year for sure. But certainly a lot of lessons learned this year. And I'm going to, at this point, hand it off to Brenda to facilitate it about questions. And whatever I can do to elaborate on anything, I'm happy to do so.
Thank you, Corey. I appreciate you sharing your experiences. I think while you didn't use the word, I think what was front of mind for me was the idea of pivot. And so recognizing that you quickly needed to change and adjust your traditional practices. As you indicated, your institution has been a long-standing presence at TPE, and the fact that you had to modify and think differently is certainly appreciated. At this point, we will ask anyone who's joined us today, if you would like to ask a question directly to Corey, for you to simply unmute yourself and pose a question. I have a few created if folks are still kind of pondering and thinking through that, but certainly feel free if you would like to ask. I see Eleanor has taken the video off, so go right ahead.
Hi, thanks for doing this today. I apologize, I'm at home because of the classroom closure with a 2-year-old, so I got a little distracted there. Could you go back to what you were saying about how you do assessment?
Sure. So while we did a lot of planning for assessment, this last year was not a typical assessing year. So in a typical year, what we do, we want to make sure that we're following up with candidates in a variety of ways to figure out how we could do things better and how to prepare for them. So we'll typically reach out to all of our candidates who have completed an interview with us to just figure out how their experience up until that first point has happened. Then anyone that's being invited to campus, virtual or not, we have an assessment that's created, ready to go, to learn more about what they're wanting to get out of an on-campus experience so that we can personalize the experience for them. And then, of course, another one after their on-campus experience to see how we did. So right now, there's at least 3 different touch points in that regard where we want to figure out how we did and what we can do to better support them in that next step in the process. Great question, Eleanor. Thank you.
Charlotte?
Yes, hi, my name is Charlotte McLeod-Whitaker. I use she, her pronouns. I am very curious to learn more about the virtual on-campus experience. And so we are currently planning, hopefully, to hire a good amount of folks and to bring them to Washington to at least see the school and to see where they live. But we don't necessarily want to put the type of pressure to do an on-campus experience like we've done in the past. And also our testing protocol wouldn't necessarily allow for folks to just come into the bubble like that. And so I'm curious if there are like lessons learned or things that you've seen through these these campus experiences, or things that you maybe practices we did prior to COVID that like you found that like if something else is more meaningful or impactful for folks, or any insights to that, I would really appreciate.
Absolutely, Charlotte. Thank you for asking that. We were so proud of our virtual on-campus experience that we didn't get to roll it out. So the first thing we were going to do is space it out just enough time so that a package can arrive to them with everything that we wanted them to know in time for the on-campus experience, plus, of course, some gifts from ASU. We knew that there were certain interviews that didn't make sense to do without being in person, but plenty that did make sense. So we tried to take what might have been a 2-day experience, shorten it into a 1-day experience, but we also knew that the role of a host would be so important that we were planning on whoever the host was to check in with the candidate in between interviews each time, as well as to make sure that there were breaks. I cannot stress how important all the feedback we got from our own team members about making sure there were breaks throughout a virtual on-campus day, and not to mention the meals as well. Whereas in a traditional on-campus, it might make sense to have a whole bunch of people eating with the candidate while talking about their experiences there. We need to let someone go and actually make some food or get some food if they're not with us, and of course have that decompressing time as well. And I mentioned about the assessment before, asking are there certain things that they wanted to know further. I know when I was doing one of my searches, my faith is very important to me, and trying to ask where there are synagogues in the area or how someone who's Jewish can connect with the community was very important. And if somebody gives us that kind of feedback, we want to be ready and have something personalized for that. And of course, just opportunities to debrief. I mentioned already about the host. I feel like there was something else I was going to say, but we have a lot of intentionality. Oh, videos. We were going to have videos of our apartments, our community director apartments, because they can't see it with their own eyes. And we know that's always one of the most common questions we get from our community director candidates. Where am I going to live? What's that going to look like? So we actually did create some videos that we haven't needed yet, but we'll use those for next year. So thank you, Charlotte.
Other questions from the attendees?
I'll hop back in. I'm curious what people are doing with, are socials happening? Is there, or the informational interviews or the information sessions, excuse me, those are kind of taking this place of that, or how do people plan to use those?
So I'll actually jump in and talk about it for this year. And then certainly I know that ASU has done opportunities for people to know more about their campuses. So for this year's virtual, yes, gone away are the socials of kind of bringing people into the space. So the informational sessions we are highlighting as kind of your campus showcase. It's your opportunity to provide greater exposure to your campus that they wouldn't otherwise know about, because there likely won't be an in-person opportunity or things of that nature, or you're going to be limited in your interview time and don't have a lot of time to talk through all the things and the environment associated with your campus that would bring. So you can use that in a multitude of ways. It can be exclusively about your position. It can be about the broader campus. It can be about the neighboring communities. But we're hoping that you'll use it as an opportunity for folks just to get to know your campus and your program a little bit better. You'll notice on our website a little later that you'll have the links to go ahead and start registering for and sign up for. And then in the coming days, you'll then be assigned a time on that particular day at which you can then start to advertise that link to whomever might be interested in your event.
So the link is not available to everyone. It's just those who you invite.
Our tech support is going to provide the answer. There you go.
So, yeah, and it's our first year, so it's hard to sort of spread the message when it's new. So yes, for this, because it is an add-on option at that $50 rate, it will be made available to all candidates. So that's why they're specifically on Monday and Tuesday, So it's a good opportunity to also, if you want candidates that are maybe already planning to interview with you, though, you might want to encourage them to come to maybe get some questions answered to save and be more efficient during the interview process. But it's also a great opportunity for employers that maybe are trying to get more interest from candidates and their positions to really spotlight their institution, their job. Why, I live 30 minutes outside of Columbus, Ohio, and people might say, why would you ever want to live there and work at a small private liberal arts school? And right, so we might focus on that, for example. So those will be published to all candidates for them to come to. By all means, employers can absolutely still host socials on their own, but because those have always been really an invite only, we didn't want to try to monetize that, and it just didn't make sense to also set that up, because if you're going to host a social, you're going to want to use your system and platform and what works best for your institution and what day and times work. So you can absolutely still have a Zoom social or networking event, and be aware of the schedule. And, as we're telling candidates, there's especially by virtue of being virtual, people are going to still be at work. Some may still be taking classes. People are going to kind of maybe opt in and out with, as opposed to physically being present all day, every day for 3 or 4 straight days. Obviously, our hope is people can take as much advantage of it as possible. But by all means, we want your employer needs to be met.
Corey, real quick, I think this can be our last question, but there is a question here that says, with TPE being earlier this year as compared to late March, has your hiring timeline changed?
Chris, that's a great question. I wish that it did change. We're actually still waiting on final approval from, right now, every job that gets posted has to go all the way to the president of our university because of, well, I want to say COVID, but with just everything that's going on right now. So as soon as that gets approved, we are just going to dive right into it. Our hope is to actually register this week for TPE so that we can start reviewing applications, so we know who we're going to reach out to and target for interviews and invite to interview. And all we have to do is hit send on email. But our goal was originally to do our interviews in February through early March virtually again. And really, regardless of when TPE dates are, that was always going to be our plan for this year. We're going to do as much as we can in alignment to be consistent with all the schools that are going to be present at TPE. So great question, Chris.
And Chris, I'll add that, while there might be this kind of campus or institutional timeline, we still encourage you to utilize TPE in a number of ways. And so even if you're unsure of it being a permanent position in an anticipated way, you can still post your position, list it as anticipated, and have greater access to the candidates that are going through the process. And maybe you're just doing informational interviews as opposed to the formal interviews that you would in your traditional timeline. You have the ability to post your positions right up until the last day of our TPE event, which means that you get greater exposure again to our candidate pool, and then they at least know that there's a possibility of positions at your institution. I appreciate Corey saying that they were very transparent in their communication to include messaging around the pandemic and whether or not positions would become permanent and that particular timeline. That might be advisable for folks to at least know on the front end, this isn't going to be likely an immediate position that I'll be interviewed for, but I am interested in working at your institution. So feel free to kind of take that information that we've provided and adjust your timeline appropriately. Corey has provided his email in our chat if anyone is interested in speaking further about this with him specifically in his ASU experience. I want to take the time to personally thank Corey for giving of his time of today. Know that it won't end the conversation. Certainly this will be recorded and you can come back to it. But more importantly, utilize the TPE members, myself. Information can always be readily accessed by visiting our website, which is at theplacementexchange.org. You also have the ability to send emails at info. So it's info@theplacementexchange.org for more information. Lastly, I will share that if you are interested or registered to be a TPE employer or considering it, we will have a session tomorrow where we will teach you how to go through the actual functional process of searching for candidates and being able to start to gather and develop your pool of those that you might be interested in interviewing either during our virtual event or even considering as part of your process once you have a stronger understanding of what your positions will look like. Thank you all for attending, giving of your time. Appreciate it. The recording will be posted in the coming days. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you again, Corey. I greatly appreciate it. Be well. Take care. Bye, everybody.